900 massive iron chariots roared fiercely across the barren plains. For 20 long years, the heavens seemed completely silent to the desperate cries below, and the only person willing to stand up against a brutal empire was a woman sitting quietly under a tree. She was a fair judge who carried absolutely no sword. She was a brave mother who rose to become an outstanding military general. The main highways of the nation were completely abandoned by the terrified people. Trembling travelers were forced to sneak through dangerous, winding mountain paths. They were the remnants of a broken nation hiding miserably in the dark shadows. They could only pray hopelessly that the enemy would simply pass them by. But what if the greatest weapon in this impossible war was not forged from iron? What if it was made entirely of wood, mud, and pure, raw courage? A seasoned military commander trembling in fear at a sudden, unexpected prophecy. A completely dry riverbed suddenly turning into a roaring, violent liquid grave. A warm cup of milk handed directly to a desperate, cornered murderer. And at the very final moment, everything was decided by an ordinary tent peg. A single, decisive strike shattered an entire army and changed the course of history forever. If you have ever felt completely overwhelmed by impossible odds, this story is for you. For 2 unimaginably long decades, the entire land of Israel could barely breathe. They were merely existing, not truly living. King Jabin of Canaan ruled the entire region with a brutally oppressive hand. But his true terror lay in his cold-blooded, ruthless military commander. He was a cruel and merciless man named Sisera. Sisera did not merely defeat his enemies on the open battlefield. He ruthlessly crushed them into fine dust without a single shred of mercy. He commanded a military force that struck absolute, paralyzing terror into the hearts of all Israelites. That terrifying force consisted of 900 chariots fitted with heavy iron. In the ancient world, an iron chariot was a completely unstoppable machine of war. It represented the absolute pinnacle of cutting-edge, ruthless military technology at the time. When 900 of these machines rolled together across the plains, the ground itself shook violently. The noise they created was a terrifying and deafening mechanical roar. It was the harsh, inescapable grinding of heavy, solid iron wheels. It was the thunderous rumbling of thousands of charging war horses. It was the inescapable sound of imminent, approaching death. The Israelites had absolutely nothing that could match that devastating, destructive power. They were simple farmers, humble shepherds, and struggling families just trying to survive the harvest season. They possessed no chariots, very few proper swords, and absolutely no hope. Overwhelming fear quickly became their bitter daily bread. People became so desperate that they stopped walking on the main traveled roads altogether. If a desperate father needed to travel to the next town to buy grain, he crept through the dense forests. He hid nervously among the jagged rocky hills, absolutely terrified of Sisera's cruel patrols. Entire villages were completely abandoned as terrified families fled to the walled cities. The Israelites cried out desperately to the Lord in their extreme, crushing misery. But for 2 whole decades, the sky seemed made of cold, unfeeling, heavy brass. They felt completely invisible to the vast universe. They felt totally and utterly forgotten by God. But God had not forgotten them for a single moment. He was simply and quietly preparing his divine answer in the most unexpected place. And he was preparing to use the most unexpected person imaginable. In the rugged hill country of Ephraim, between the towns of Ramah and Bethel, stood a deeply rooted palm tree. And sitting quietly under the shade of that massive tree was a woman named Deborah. In a dark time, when the bravest men hid cowardly in mountain caves, when everyone desperately avoided taking on any kind of dangerous leadership, Deborah courageously stood up to hold a fractured, terrified nation together. She was an incredibly wise and divinely gifted prophetess. She was a righteous and fair judge for all the people. People from all over the land of Israel made the dangerous, winding journey through the hills just to reach her. They brought her their bitterest disputes, their angry arguments, and their deepest fears. She listened quietly, prayed sincerely, and spoke the wisdom and justice of God into their broken lives. Deborah did not panic when the ground vibrated with the distant, heavy rumble of iron chariots. She did not run away to hide in the deep safety of the mountain caves. She stayed exactly where she was, firmly planted under her familiar palm tree. She profoundly understood a great truth that the trembling armies of Israel had completely forgotten. She knew that the power of God was not measured by iron wheels or sharpened spears. It was measured entirely by pure, absolute obedience. And the living God was speaking directly to her spirit. The long, bitter time for hiding in the shadows was officially over. The agonizing time for desperate weeping was finally finished. One morning, as the wind shifted, Deborah looked up intently toward the northern mountains. God had given her a highly specific and urgent divine message. It was a battle command that sounded like pure madness to anyone who understood warfare. She immediately sent a fast runner far to the north, up to the territory of Naphtali, to summon a man named Barak. Barak was a known, respected warrior and a highly capable leader of men. But like absolutely everyone else in the paralyzed nation, he had been completely terrified by the shadow of Sisera. The messenger successfully found Barak and delivered the heavy, undeniable summons. When Barak finally arrived at the palm tree, the air was thick with unspoken tension. He stood respectfully before Deborah, a seasoned soldier looking down at a woman sitting peacefully in the shade. But it was this seemingly ordinary woman who carried the fierce fire of heaven. She looked him straight in the eyes with an unbreakable, fierce certainty, and she did not hesitate for a single second to deliver the direct command from the Lord God of Israel. She ordered him to take 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and march straight up to Mount Tabor. God promised that he would lure Sisera, his chariots, and his entire army to the Kishon River. And right there, God would deliver that invincible army completely into Barak's hands. Barak stared down at her in absolutely stunned, breathless silence. To an ordinary farmer, 10,000 men might sound like a massive, invincible army. But Barak deeply understood the cold, ruthless mathematics of warfare. 10,000 untrained foot soldiers, armed with farming tools and old rusted swords. Fighting against 900 heavy iron chariots was not a fair battle in any sense. It was a mass, brutal suicide and nothing more. And out in the wide-open, flat valley by the Kishon River, the chariots would have the absolute devastating advantage. Those heavy iron wheels would violently tear through the vulnerable Israelite lines in a matter of minutes. Flesh and bone could never win against the crushing power of cold iron. A heavy silence stretched between them as the hot wind rustled the wide leaves of the palm tree. Barak stood at the absolute crossroads of history, facing a life-or-death decision. He had heard the clear word of God, but his mind vividly pictured the terrifying iron machines. The fate of an entire generation now hung completely on the decision of this trembling soldier. Finally, Barak broke the deafening silence with a tense and fearful voice. He declared that if Deborah went with him, he would go, but if she did not, he would refuse to fight. To an outside observer, this sounded exactly like pure, unadulterated cowardice. A seasoned military commander hiding nervously behind the protective robes of a woman. But it was not cowardice, because Barak deeply understood the brutal reality of their dire situation. He did not trust his own sword, nor his own fragile ability to inspire a broken people. He only trusted the fierce, undeniable presence of God that rested so heavily upon this woman. Deborah did not blink, nor did she mock his deep, paralyzing fear. She calmly nodded her head and agreed to walk directly into the jaws of death with him. But then her tone shifted, carrying the heavy, mysterious weight of the inevitable future. She prophesied that because of the course he was taking, the honor of the victory would not be his. God would deliver the mighty Sisera into the hands of a woman. Barak accepted that humbling condition without making a single argument or complaint. He cared absolutely nothing for personal glory. He only desperately wanted his people to survive. Together, they left the safe shadow of the palm tree and traveled north to rally the troops. 10,000 Israelite men slowly crept out of the dark mountain caves and dense forests. They carried farming tools, wooden sticks, and rusted swords as they climbed to the top of Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor was a massive dome-shaped mountain rising suddenly out of the completely flat Jezreel Valley. It was a perfect temporary refuge because heavy chariots could never climb the steep, rocky slopes. But this high ground was also a deadly, ticking trap waiting to close its jaws. 10,000 men crammed onto a mountain peak would quickly exhaust their meager water and food supplies. Eventually, agonizing thirst would force them down into the flat valley, right where the chariots waited to crush them. News of the desperate uprising quickly reached Sisera at the Canaanite military headquarters. He did not laugh, nor did he send a small patrol to scatter the foolish farmers. Sisera was a man who believed entirely in the application of absolute, crushing force. He instantly ordered all 900 iron chariots and elite soldiers to the Kishon River, right below Mount Tabor. From the rocky peak, Barak and his militiamen looked down into the vast, open valley. The terrifying sight below them was enough to instantly freeze the blood in their veins. 900 iron chariots were lined up in perfect, terrifying battle formation, stretching out as far as the eye could see. The scorching afternoon sun gleamed brightly off the cold, heavy iron armor. The trap was completely shut, there was nowhere left to run, and going down meant certain, violent death. For days, brutal psychological warfare continued, causing thick desperation to hang over the Israelite camp. But Deborah was not looking at the iron chariots, nor was she calculating the impossible odds. Her spirit was intently listening to a completely different sound coming from the heavens. Suddenly, she stood up, her eyes blazing with a fierce, unstoppable divine certainty. She pointed her hand down toward the valley and ordered Barak to charge, declaring that God had given Sisera into his hands. It was the most insane command in military history, ordering unarmed infantry to attack heavy armor on a flat plain. But Barak drew his sword, took a deep breath, and began to sprint down the steep slope. 10,000 men roared their war cries and poured down the mountain like a desperate, unstoppable avalanche. Down in the valley, Sisera smiled cruelly as he watched the fools freely giving themselves over to slaughter. 900 iron chariots began to roll forward, accelerating to create a ground-shaking roar. They were hurtling straight toward each other, fragile flesh charging at a massive wall of solid iron. But at that exact, precise moment, the impossible happened in the sky above the Jezreel Valley. The bright blue sky did not just darken, it seemed to literally tear wide open. A violent, deafening roar echoed across the plain, far louder than the thunder of 1,000 horses. An unnatural, terrifying deluge of rain suddenly slammed down like a massive wall of water into the valley. The Kishon River, completely dry just moments before, turned into a roaring, violent liquid grave. Flash floods carrying heavy mud and debris surged across the plain and slammed directly into the Canaanite lines. The Jezreel Valley was famous for its rich soil, which was hard when dry but turned into a swamp when wet. In the blink of an eye, the flat battlefield turned into a vast, deep, sticky sea of bottomless mud. Sisera's absolute greatest advantage was instantly transformed into his fatal, inescapable weakness. The heavy iron wheels locked up, sinking deep into the thick sludge all the way up to their axles. 900 invincible war machines were suddenly stopped dead in the middle of the flooded field. The heavily armored war horses panicked, screaming and thrashing wildly as they dragged each other deeper into the muck. The Canaanite elite soldiers, wearing thick bronze armor, were suddenly trapped inside sinking metal cages. Meanwhile, the Israelite soldiers had absolutely no heavy armor to weigh them down. They ran lightly across the mud, leaped onto the stuck chariots, and unleashed absolute vengeance. 20 long years of suppressed humiliation were violently released through simple hunting spears and wooden clubs. It was no longer a tactical military battle. It was a scene of pure, chaotic destruction. Sisera, the proud and terrifying general, stood completely frozen in his royal command chariot as he watched the massacre. He threw down his heavy shield, dropped his sword into the mud, and leaped out of his sinking chariot. The most ruthless warlord in the ancient world was now fleeing on foot in sheer, absolute terror. He ran wildly toward the east, completely abandoning his loyal soldiers who were screaming for mercy behind him. He ran until his legs were exhausted, finally spotting the quiet, distant tents of Heber the Kenite. This was neutral territory, a place with a peace treaty with Canaan, representing his final safe harbor. A woman named Jael stepped out of the largest tent, calmly greeting the trembling, mud-covered general. She kindly invited him inside, taking a thick blanket to completely cover his soaking, exhausted body. When he desperately begged for water, she opened a leather skin and poured him a rich cup of warm milk. In ancient culture, offering milk was an unspoken, unbreakable promise of honor and absolute protection. Sisera eagerly drank the milk, felt his racing heart slow down, and fell into a deep, heavy sleep from pure exhaustion. Jael stood silently in the dark shadows of the tent, looking down at the absolute worst enemy of her people. She did not search for a sword or a spear, but quietly picked up a heavy wooden hammer. In her other hand, she firmly gripped a long, sharply pointed wooden tent peg. Her entire life, she had used these exact tools to drive pegs into the hardest, most unyielding earth. She crept over to Sisera and carefully placed the sharp wooden point directly against the sleeping general's temple. She took a deep breath, gathered all her strength, and brought the heavy iron hammer swinging down. The final sound of this epic battle was not clashing iron, but the thud of a hammer crushing a skull. A simple wooden tent peg, driven by the hands of a woman, had completely shattered the mighty Canaanite army. When Barak arrived hunting his enemy, he found only Sisera's dead body pinned violently to the muddy ground. Deborah's prophecy was perfectly fulfilled, as the ultimate glory of the victory belonged entirely to a woman. But this story is not merely about an ancient military battle or a flooded riverbed. If you are currently facing a completely impossible situation, staring down your own 900 iron chariots, God does not require you to have all the answers or possess all the powerful weapons in your hands. Your lack of resources is never a barrier to God. It is the perfect, empty stage for a divine miracle. Just like Jael, God will weaponize exactly whatever simple tools you already have in your hands to create victory. And if you feel that the heavens are silent to your desperate prayers, remember the 20 years of Israel's tears. God's silence is absolutely never a sign of his absence from your life. He is simply and quietly preparing the perfect, unstoppable storm to wash away all your enemies. This great ancient rescue points us directly toward the greatest, most powerful rescue in all of human history. Humanity was once hopelessly trapped under the heavy, crushing oppression of our own sin, unable to save ourselves. But Jesus Christ willingly stepped down into our dark, muddy valley to bring eternal salvation. He allowed his hands and feet to be pierced by iron nails on a wooden cross to pay your debt. He rose gloriously from the grave, crushing the power of darkness and securing the ultimate, everlasting victory. God is always fighting fiercely for you, and the final victory has already been perfectly won.